Respectful and effective ways to gain informed consent from patients when a student is on placement at the practice. Informed patient consent is an essential element of good medico-legal practice. When we talk about informed consent, we're referring to the process of ensuring that your patients are made aware of the presence of a student in the clinic. Also, that they are given the option to agree or refuse to have the student involved in observing or actively participating in any part of the consultation. In order for informed consent to be considered valid, the client must be competent and the consent should be given voluntarily.
We do always put a sign up at the front desk, so it's there when they come and inform us that they've arrived. The reception staff also let them know that one particular doctor will have a student during their consultation, and we ask them to sign and read the consent form prior to going into the doctor. And then on our software we inform the doctor that they're either happy for the student to be in or not. So the doctor's aware to either let the student stay in, so then they can be introduced as soon as the patient comes in, or we ask them just to step out and maybe have time with the nurse or reception staff while that patient's being seen if they don't consent.
If the student was going to be sitting in my room and a patient was in my room already, well, they've got a notice at reception to say that there are medical students present, and then when they go up to say they're here, and then obviously the reception know they're coming in to see me, then they'd be told again, look, Linda's got a nursing student, are you happy for the nursing student to be present in the room? And then they get them to sign a consent, well, one way or other, to say whether they're happy or they're not happy. So that's if they're in my room there. We did have a scenario where we had the patient already in the room and we were doing a wound dressing, and the medical student, the doctor thought it would be good for the medical student to come in. So then it was actually just a verbal, do you mind if the medical student comes in? They're not looking at your notes, they're just going to look at your leg. Are you happy with that? So that's probably what happened that way inadvertently. But I think they still then signed a consent to say that they were happy for the patient to come in. I know there's varying degrees, because when they go see a doctor, they then access medical records and they get permission to do all of that. But for me, it was just sitting in the room and being present. And like I said before, when we went and did home visits, it was a phone call to let them know. And I did the same with the nursing students as well. And they have choices, but most of the time they're pretty obliging.
There's a big sign up in the waiting room saying we've got students. Patients are asked if they're comfortable if the student is in or not. And if they're not, the student just leaves. And if they are, they stay. And then, depending on what the patient's problem is, we'll sometimes, either before or after examine them, ask the patient if they mind if the student does. And I actually don't use the word student. I use the word trainee doctor, which gives much more gravitas, and I think is a better way of, because who wants to be examined by a student? But a trainee doctor, that's different. Words are very powerful.
The method of consenting may vary from practice to practice. However, the best practice principles are to have a notice visible in the waiting room announcing the presence of the medical student at the practice, to provide the patients who might see the student with an information sheet about the purpose of the student presence. A sample template of this is available in the download section. To obtain consent from the patient before they see the student. Written consent is preferable, but consent may be obtained verbally as well. To document the consent in the patient's record for that day. This could either mean scanning the consent form or simply making a note in the patient record to that effect. In general, the reception staff would be largely involved in this process, so they should be informed prior to the start of the student placement.
It's having thought through how you're going to be doing, having the physical geography. So as you can see in this room, there's enough room for the student to be having a chair and sitting in the consultation without imposing themselves on the patient. So the patient has got the option then of just interacting with me, or can spread that interaction to the student if he or she prefers. And that's something that the patient decides on doing.
We try not to have the same doctor do it every year, just because their patients sometimes go, does nobody else participate? Why is there always, if they happen to only come once a year, why do I have a student every time that they're here? So occasionally one of the lady doctors might say, I won't this year, but I will next year, but one of the male doctors will take them on, just for a bit of variety and a bit of difference. So just so patients don't get upset as well. We like them to keep coming back.
In some practices, the GP supervisor may choose to take responsibility for the consent process and its documentation. This concludes Part 3.